The 2026 World Cup was supposed to be football's greatest celebration, the biggest tournament ever staged, stretching across 3 nations, featuring 48 teams, and promising a month of football the world had never seen before. FIFA called it historic. The host nations called it a golden moment. And for one 34-year-old referee from Mogadishu, it was going to be the crowning achievement of a life built around the beautiful game. His name is Omar Artan. And what happened to him wasn't a red card. It wasn't a suspension. It wasn't a fitness test he failed or a falling out with someone inside FIFA's administration. Omar Artan was turned away at the border. The country hosting the World Cup refused to let one of FIFA's own selected referees through its airport doors. After 11 hours of questioning inside Miami International Airport, he was placed in a holding cell, put on a plane back to Istanbul, and that was it. His World Cup was over before he ever stepped foot on a pitch. But then, something remarkable happened. While FIFA appeared to quietly absorb the situation with a measured press release, UEFA moved in the opposite direction with a clear and deliberate statement of intent. Football's most powerful continental governing body didn't just speak, it acted. And that action has sent ripples through the football world in ways that will shape conversations about how this sport governs itself for years to come. So, what actually happened to Omar Artan? Why did the United States turn away a referee handpicked by FIFA itself? What does this reveal about the cracks running beneath the biggest tournament on earth? And why are people calling UEFA's response one of the most significant moments in football this year? Let's walk through all of it. Omar Artan didn't come from a country with a long footballing tradition. Somalia has spent decades rebuilding from civil conflict, and the sport there has faced every imaginable obstacle. Infrastructure, funding, stability, none of it came easy. But Artan pushed through all of it. He earned his FIFA listing in 2018, worked his way steadily through continental competitions, and in January of 2024 became the first Somali official to referee at the Africa Cup of Nations, taking charge of the Group E match between Tunisia and Namibia. That was a milestone in itself, but it was just the beginning. In 2025, the Confederation of African Football named him the continent's best male referee. That isn't a minor recognition. That is the highest individual award a referee can receive in African football. It's a statement that, out of every official operating across 54 national federations, this is the one who stood above the rest. FIFA took notice. When the official list of 52 referees for the 2026 World Cup was announced 2 months before the tournament, Omar Artan's name was on it. He was set to become the first Somali referee in World Cup history, one of only a handful of African officials ever to officiate at a senior men's tournament. This was history for him personally, history for Somalia, and history for the African continent. So, when he boarded a flight from Istanbul to Miami in early June, he wasn't simply traveling for a job assignment. He was walking into the moment his entire career had been building toward. He carried a valid visa. He had his FIFA accreditation documentation. He had photographs from his career that could show border officials exactly who he was and what he did for a living. He was prepared. He was ready. None of it was enough. After landing at Miami International Airport, Artan was pulled aside and held for 11 hours. He told the New York Times that border officials questioned him about Somali politics and specifically asked him about the Al-Shabaab militant group. He showed them his FIFA credentials. He walked them through his career history. He presented everything he had. At the end of those 11 hours, he was placed in a detention area and put on the next available flight back to Istanbul. U.S. Customs and Border Protection confirmed the incident, stating that a Somali national arriving from Istanbul was deemed inadmissible due to vetting concerns. The Department of Homeland Security echoed that language. Then, a Trump administration official told CBS News something more specific. The denial was based on what they called derogatory information tied to alleged associations with suspected terrorist groups. Artan himself told reporters he was never given a clear explanation at the airport. His words were simple and direct. He said, quote, "I think that they have a problem with my country. He had the right papers. He'd done everything correctly. And it still wasn't enough. To understand why this happened, you have to understand where Somalia sits in America's current immigration framework. Somalia is one of nearly 40 countries subject to significantly tightened U.S. travel restrictions, policies that were expanded considerably under the Trump administration's approach to what it calls national security vetting. Under these policies, people arriving from designated countries face a much higher bar at the border, regardless of what documentation they carry. And critically, in Artan's case, the visa had already been approved before he got on the plane. He had cleared the initial process. The denial happened at the physical border, after all of that, in real time by customs officials applying their own on-the-ground judgment. FIFA's official response came quickly. They confirmed that Artan would be unable to train and officiate at the tournament, then included a line in their statement that has been quoted, debated, and dissected ever since. The statement read, "In line with previous FIFA events, a host government ultimately determines who receives a visa and who is admitted into their country." In other words, FIFA's position was, essentially, this is not our decision to make. The matter belongs to the host government. FIFA President Gianni Infantino, when pushed by reporters and football figures for a stronger response, reportedly told critics to, quote, chill and relax. Those words did not go over well in the football world, at all. And that's precisely where the story pivots. Because while FIFA released a press release and moved on, UEFA did something no one was expecting. Just hours before the 2026 World Cup officially kicked off, UEFA President Alexander Schifrin released a statement praising Omar Artan by name and announcing that UEFA, in direct coordination with the Confederation of African Football, had appointed Artan to officiate the 2026 UEFA Super Cup final. The match is scheduled for August 12th in Salzburg, Austria. It's the traditional preseason showpiece between the winners of the Champions League and the Europa League. This year, that means Paris Saint-Germain against Aston Villa, and with that single appointment, Omar Artan will become the first African referee in history to officiate a major UEFA final. Schifrin's statement was careful, deliberate, and unmistakably pointed. He described Artan as an excellent young, but already experienced referee who had proven himself at the highest levels of African competition. Then he added a line that sounded less like administrative football language and more like a direct message to the watching world. He said, "Football is made to connect people, and UEFA wants to show its respect to Omar and his outstanding officiating skills, which had earned him such a prestigious nomination." CAF. President Patrice Motsepe was equally vocal, saying that Artan had made Somalia and the entire African continent extremely proud, and calling the Super Cup appointment a great honor for African referees everywhere. Think about what that contrast actually looks like. FIFA, the global governing body, selected Artan in the first place and then watched him be turned away from the tournament and essentially told the world, there's nothing we can do. UEFA, a continental body with zero obligation to respond, stepped in immediately and handed Artan one of the most prominent refereeing appointments in European football. The contrast is hard to look past, and plenty of people in football aren't even trying to. Now, in fairness to FIFA, their position is not entirely without logic. They don't set U.S. immigration policy. They can't issue visas, and they have no authority to override decisions made by customs officials at international airports. There is a real legal reality here that doesn't simply disappear because it's inconvenient. A sovereign government controls its own borders, and no sporting organization can change that with a press release. But the problem isn't just what FIFA couldn't do. It's the tone of what they chose to say and not say in the moments when people were watching for some kind of leadership. And the bigger problem is that Omar Artan's case is not an isolated incident. It is the most visible point in a pattern of entry complications that has surrounded this World Cup since before a single whistle was blown. Look at what happened with Iraq. When the Iraqi national team arrived at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport on June 5th, star striker Ayman Hussein was detained for nearly 7 hours. Border officials questioned him extensively, and his phone was reportedly confiscated and examined during the process. That alone would generate outrage in any ordinary context. But it went further. The team's official photographer, Talal Salah, was held for more than 10 hours before being denied entry to the United States entirely. He never made it to the tournament. He was sent home. The Iraqi delegation publicly expressed frustration and described the experience as deeply humiliating. Then there's Iran. Iran's national team qualified for this World Cup and had been scheduled to play their 3 group stage games inside the United States. Given the severe diplomatic tensions between Washington and Tehran, the situation was complicated from day one. The Iranian Football Federation was still fighting for visas just 10 days before the team's first scheduled match. U.S. authorities ultimately granted entry to the players, head coach Emir Galanoy, and several coaching staff members. But 15 Iranian administrative and technical personnel were denied visas entirely. The Federation described many of those individuals as integral to the squad's preparation. Iran moved its training camp from Arizona to Tijuana, Mexico, across the border, and was informed that the delegation would not be permitted to remain inside the United States between their scheduled fixtures. In effect, Iran was allowed to play in the World Cup as long as it essentially stayed outside the country hosting it. FIFA found itself in the middle of an extraordinary diplomatic situation with no clean way out, reportedly exploring whether Iran's group games could be relocated to Mexico, an option that raised its own logistical and symbolic complications. Beyond Iran and Iraq, delegations from Senegal and Uzbekistan also encountered visa complications and heightened screening in the lead-up to the tournament. These are World Cup qualifying nations. These are teams and officials who went through every proper channel and still faced obstacles that teams from other parts of the world simply did not face. The pattern was visible enough and consistent enough that it stopped looking like individual cases and started looking like a systemic issue. There's also the question of ICE, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, being present at World Cup venues. Officials confirmed that ICE agents would be stationed at stadiums during the tournament, citing security as their primary focus, while acknowledging that immigration enforcement remained part of their active mandate. The response was immediate and significant. Workers at major venues, including SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, voted to strike in protest, citing fears for their own safety and the safety of their families. More than 120 immigrant rights organizations issued formal travel warnings to fans, players, journalists, and staff planning to attend the tournament. The off-field picture doesn't stop there. Ticket prices have generated their own wave of controversy. Reports of resale tickets for the final, reaching prices approaching $33,000, drew sharp public criticism, with New York's Attorney General releasing a formal statement warning that consumers should not be manipulated into paying inflated prices. The Attorney General called it an unacceptable exploitation of fan demand for what is supposed to be the world's game. India, one of the largest football audiences on Earth, entered June of 2026 without a confirmed broadcaster for the World Cup. FIFA had reportedly sought $100 million for a combined rights package, and negotiations with India's major streaming platforms collapsed, leaving hundreds of millions of potential viewers without an official way to watch the tournament. The scale of that failure is hard to overstate when you consider what FIFA regularly says about growing the sport globally. Then there's the heat. Universities and climate researchers had raised concerns months before the tournament that several U.S. host cities would face dangerous temperatures during the June to July playing window. FIFA's response was to introduce mandatory 3-minute hydration breaks in both halves of every match, a measure that drew criticism from players and medical professionals who felt it didn't go far enough. Dozens of players signed an open letter urging FIFA to take stronger action on heat protocols and to be more transparent about the environmental impact of a 48-team tournament that requires extensive air travel between host cities spread across an entire continent. None of these issues individually is enough to define a tournament. Football is resilient, and its moments on the pitch have a way of cutting through almost anything happening off it. But, taken together, the picture they form is of a World Cup that arrived carrying enormous expectations and has had to navigate an unusually heavy load of off-field turbulence before a single knockout game has been played. Let's come back to the specific question of what Omar Artan's case means for referees, for football's global governance, and for the tournaments that come after this one. What happened to Artan is genuinely without precedent in World Cup officiating history. A FIFA-appointed match official carrying valid documentation, arriving in the host country, being physically turned away at the border and sent home. That specific sequence of events has not happened before in quite this way. Every World Cup has had its controversies. Every tournament has had its tensions. But there's something qualitatively different about a situation where the global body selects an official. That official obtains the right visa, gets on the plane, and still ends up in a detention cell at Miami International. The question this raises for football's future is not comfortable. If FIFA cannot guarantee that the officials it appoints will be permitted to do their jobs, what does that say about the integrity of the officiating selection process? What does it say to a referee from Somalia or Iraq or Iran or any of the other countries that sit on America's travel restriction lists about whether their appointments are real or conditional? And if FIFA-appointed referees with valid documentation can be turned away, what confidence should fans from those same countries have that their journey to a World Cup match will be without incident? These are not hypothetical questions. They are questions that multiple people are now asking out loud, and they are questions that will follow FIFA into every future conversation about hosting bids, contractual obligations, and what the organization actually means when it describes itself as the guardian of the global game. UEFA's response to all of this has been met with widespread approval inside football. By appointing Artan to the Super Cup, UEFA accomplished several things simultaneously. It gave Artan a concrete and historic opportunity at a genuine high-profile occasion. It made him the first African referee ever to take charge of a major UEFA final. It demonstrated that football's governing bodies have more than one option when one of their officials is treated unjustly. And it did all of this without needing to issue a political statement or pick a public fight with any government. The message was in the action itself. CAF's involvement matters equally. The partnership between UEFA and CAF in making this appointment shows the kind of cross-confederation cooperation that football's institutions don't always manage to pull off. When the two bodies work together in response to a moment like this, it signals something about the direction football governance could take when it chooses to lead rather than manage. Artan's own response throughout all of this has been remarkable. When he landed back in Mogadishu, he was met by thousands of people. Government officials greeted him with flowers. Fans wrapped him in Somalia's sky blue flag. He was lifted onto shoulders in a stadium packed not for a match, but specifically for him. He told the gathered crowds, "What happened has happened, and it was fate. I am grateful for the support FIFA gave me." Then he added the line that many people felt said everything about who he is. He said, "Despite the circumstances, I am in a positive mood, and I am focused on the next challenges in my refereeing career." That composure, in the face of what happened to him, has earned him a level of respect that no World Cup appearance could have manufactured on its own. Looking ahead, the 2026 World Cup is underway. Matches are being played. Goals are being scored. Football will deliver the moments it always delivers, and the tournament itself will ultimately be defined by what happens on the pitch across the coming weeks. But the conversations that Artan's case has started are not going to close when the final whistle blows in whatever stadium hosts the championship match. FIFA will face ongoing scrutiny over whether its current arrangements with host nations provide adequate protections for tournament personnel. The Artan situation will almost certainly surface in discussions about future World Cup hosting bids, particularly in conversations about what guarantees FIFA should be demanding from potential host governments as a condition of selection. The 2034 World Cup is already allocated. The bidding processes beyond that are still being shaped. What happened in Miami in early June of 2026 is now part of the record that will inform those processes. On August 12th in Salzburg, Omar Artan will walk onto a pitch to referee Paris Saint-Germain against Aston Villa in front of a global audience. It will not be the stage he was originally promised. It won't be the World Cup he spent years working toward, but it will be one of football's biggest occasions, and he will be the first African official ever to stand at the center of it for a major UEFA final. That is a permanent piece of history, and it was earned under circumstances that make it mean more, not less. The broader tension that this tournament has brought into focus between national sovereignty, security policy, and the stated values of global sport does not have a clean resolution. It never did. But it has rarely been this visible, this discussed, or this uncomfortable for the institutions that govern football to sit with. The 2026 World Cup, asked football a question about what the sport's universal values actually mean when they run up against the border policy of the country holding the party. The answer it got was complicated, and football is going to be working through that answer for a long time.